Good evening and welcome to the book stall. In partnership with Trees That Feed Foundation, we are very happy to welcome you to a discussion with Russell Fielding, author of the new book, Breadfruit, 3 Global Journeys of a Bountiful Tree. Engagingly written and compellingly argued, this book explores breadfruit's fascinating global history and varied present-day uses, of which I think we have some here. Russell Fielding is an associate professor in the HTC Honors College and the Spadoni College of Education and Social Sciences at Coastal Carolina University. He's a geographer who studies sustainable food systems in the world's coastal and island settings. Fielding is the author of The Wake of the Whale, Hunter Societies in the Caribbean and North Atlantic. Mr. Fielding will be in conversation with Michael McLaughlin, who was born and educated in Jamaica and went on to a distinguished career as a consulting actuary. In 2008, he and his wife Mary co-founded Trees That Feed Foundation to plant food-bearing trees, especially breadfruit, to provide food, jobs, and environmental benefits. Over the past 17 years, Mike and Mary have led the planting of nearly 500,000 trees across 22 countries. Let's give a warm welcome to Russell and Mike. Thank you so much.
Big welcome, first of all, to Russell.
Thank you.
So Dr. Fielding, you've heard the introduction. This is a super smart guy, and he's a nice guy. And so those are two things that go very well together. What we're going to do, you heard, I have a few questions. We'll get started, and then if you have questions, there'll be plenty of time at the end, so don't hesitate. All right, so the book, which you've got to really buy, it really resonated. It's the 3 journeys, and he'll talk about it better than I will, but from the Pacific to the Caribbean, across the Pacific, then to the Caribbean. And now what many of us are doing is spreading breadfruit and the truth and the information and the facts about breadfruit really around the world. So Trees That Feed, we're in 22 countries already, and there's others doing similar work. So let's get to Dr. Fielding. So Russell, what got you interested in breadfruit?
A hungry belly, really. I was living and working in the Caribbean. I spent a long time on St. Vincent, which is where I did much of the research for my first book. And then a few years later, my family and I moved to Barbados. And breadfruit was one of the staples of our diet, both for myself as a single and not very well-funded student researcher at first, and then for us as a family later. We lived in a little townhouse on a hill that was surrounded by breadfruit trees. We could pick our own. We could buy them in the market. We could order them on menus when we went to eat. And I had heard of breadfruit before, like many of us. You know, the name rang a bell. And I knew that I wanted to look more into it. I wanted to figure out why had I heard about this. I knew there was some backstory there. I remembered Mutiny on the Bounty. That's usually one of the first things that we remember when we hear about breadfruit. And I started looking into it, and wanting to be efficient with my time, I thought what I really ought to do is just check out from the library a book about breadfruit, rather than searching for information all over the place. So I went down to the library there at UWI in Barbados, and came up short. There was nothing. Went online to, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name Amazon inside of a bookstore, but I went online to the place we go for books, and came up short again. There was nothing yet there. And I remembered an old quote. It's attributed to Toni Morrison, the author, and she said, if that happens to you, if you're searching for a specific book to read and find out that it doesn't exist, that's your sign that you need to write it. And I took that advice seriously and decided, unlike my first project, where it started off with, academic papers first, with this one, it was a book project from the beginning. I knew that we needed a breadfruit book, and if nobody else had done it yet, I was going to get into it. So I started small. I was already living in the Caribbean, so I did local work there. I wasn't funded for the breadfruit project, but very fortunately, I came across the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation in New York, and they believed in this mission as well. So they're the primary support for the research that went into this book, and I thank them in the text, both at the beginning and the end. But really, we should see the words "thank you" to the Alfred Sloan Foundation all the way throughout, because it was them that made it possible.
When Mary and I were starting Trees That Feed, we had a similar experience. We wanted knowledge. We had practical knowledge. We ate breadfruit as kids. It was almost every meal when breadfruit was in season. But we thought, okay, we won't go to the backstory of how we got started, but we wanted information. We wanted a supply of trees. There wasn't any supply of trees. We wanted to know what were the facts, what were the origin of breadfruit. We looked for books and found nothing. We found lots of anecdotes, and the anecdotes in Jamaica where we grew up were informational, but they were contradictory sometimes and very incomplete. So welcome to a scholarly review of where breadfruit came from and where it's going. And what I really liked about the book was the three journeys. Mm-hmm. And so, in fact, we feel like we're part of the third journey.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
You want to describe the three journeys?
Sure. So I have the work of Nairi Zarega here to thank for a lot of my knowledge of Breadfruit's early story. She's a professor at Northwestern and at the Chicago Botanic Garden. As I understand, breadfruit is part of a complex of trees that are related to each other, some of which produce fruit, some of which don't. Started off as a wild tree growing in the forests of Southeast Asia, most likely around the island of Borneo, and it was domesticated. Like a lot of other crops around the world, it was eventually domesticated. This probably took place in New Guinea, or maybe the islands that are surrounding New Guinea. And from there, when the original Polynesian settlers, they weren't even called Polynesian yet, they were called Lapita, when they left that area and began to sail out into the Pacific and literally discover new islands, there's where the first footprints ever on these new beaches, they brought along cuttings of breadfruit to plant on these new islands. Today, in the Pacific, nearly every island where people have ever settled, you'll find breadfruit growing. And it's because of that first journey, which took it from its point of origin and its point of domestication all the way across the Pacific Ocean. The second journey has a bit of a darker cast to it in terms of its story. It's a darker cast that turned into something good, but it started off from not the purest of intentions. The British government sent ships to Tahiti to collect breadfruit to bring over to the Caribbean and plant so that the people enslaved on their sugar plantations would have something to eat that didn't require a lot of work. The rumor about breadfruit was that it just grew spontaneously, didn't need any human intervention. Of course, anybody who's ever tended a breadfruit tree knows that's not true. But that was the story that went ahead of it. So the British sent first a ship named the Bounty that collected breadfruit from Tahiti. The mutiny put a stop to that mission. The breadfruit was thrown overboard and the Bounty was burned after the mutineers found a new place to settle. But the British were persistent. I think we understand the British are a persistent people. They sent another pair of ships over, successfully collected breadfruit again, brought it to the Caribbean and established it there. I say it's a dark story because it was done in support of slavery. And we need to, I think that's something important to acknowledge, that this was not a beneficent gift to the people of the Caribbean. This was meant to further the condition of their enslavement. But, as resourceful as the British are, the Caribbean people are even more so. After emancipation, and even now, after most Caribbean countries have become decolonized, the Caribbean people have embraced breadfruit, not 100%. There are some holdouts. They've embraced breadfruit as something of their very own. It's no longer seen across the board in the Caribbean as an import or as something foisted upon the people. It's seen as a native food by the majority and by the younger generation. That older generation, though, still has a bit of a grudge, and I think it's a well-founded grudge against breadfruit for its participation. But we're seeing that change, and a lot of that is changing because of the work that Mike and Mary and their Caribbean counterparts are doing to rehabilitate breadfruit in the cuisine of the Caribbean. And then the third journey is really what probably most of you are most familiar with if you know Trees That Feed and if you know Mike and Mary, and that is the introduction of breadfruit to new places around the world. And this is happening in two ways. First, the way that you're more familiar with Trees That Feed as a way of fighting hunger. Breadfruit's being planted in places where food security is low, and it's a reliable source of calories for people that otherwise don't have such a reliable source. But the other way is kind of the counterpart to that, and that's that people who are interested in cuisine, people who are foodies, we would call them, or people who are interested in nutrition, particularly plant-based diet, are discovering, you can put that word in quotes, are discovering breadfruit as a new, to them, food that is worthy of consideration for the refined diet, for the refined menu. And I think that's really interesting that it's being used both as a food to fight hunger and as a food in what we would call high cuisine. It doesn't fit into one niche only. It's really a food for everyone, and it crosses economic boundaries in that way. So I think of breadfruit as a traveling crop. It's a crop that has traveled across oceans, and now it's a crop that's traveling around the world.
And that history describes some of the perspectives that people have toward breadfruit.
Yeah.
Again, when Mary and I were starting, there's a lot of people that thought, it's not necessary. There's lots of breadfruit. There's breadfruit falling on the ground, it's wasting. And that's true during the peak bearing season. But one view is that this work isn't necessary because there's plenty of breadfruit. There's the negative view as well, that it's related to this darker part of history, and there's still a little bit of that. And we hear people every now and then saying that it's not a good food, it has this dark history. To me, it's something that has a tremendous future potential. This is something that could feed the world. It's once you get a breadfruit tree established, you don't have to replant it. It's not like an annual crop. And so what we want to do is to find ways to get the word out. More governments, we're talking to governments as to how to get breadfruit, to get food independence. Barbados is an example, but many others. That's the kind of big background. Russell did like 5 years of research, just to come up with this book. It's incredibly rich in content, but there's a lot of little anecdotes in there. You want to relate a couple of stories of people you've met or things
Sure. Yeah. I find that when I write the way that I want to write, I don't fit into the box of academic writing. I published the peer-reviewed articles I needed to get tenure, but my real joy is writing in this style, which is, it's vetted. I've checked my sources, but it's also personal. So the book it kind of oscillates between science and experience, and it's not my experiences necessarily. It's me relating the stories of the people that I met while I was traveling for this work. A couple of the people, one person that really stands out in my mind is a guy named Tom Stone, and he goes by the Hawaiian translation of his last name. He is native Hawaiian, which is Pohaku. He lives in Hawaii, and he makes surfboards. And if you've seen surfboards, I've been told you can surf on Lake Michigan during certain weather events. But if you've seen surfboards here,
like this morning,
they're mostly going to be made of foam, right? Of polyurethane foam coated with fiberglass and epoxy. Tom Stone does it the old way. He carves surfboards out of wood, and his favorite wood to carve surfboards out of is what he calls ulu wood, breadfruit wood. So I visited him in Hawaii, his workshop, and he's got boards in all stages of production. And he's also a surfer. I'd seen videos of him surfing. He wears the traditional Hawaiian loincloth when he surfs. So Google that at your peril. But and I surf too. I grew up in Florida, and it's something I enjoy doing. So after talking with him about the building process, I really wanted to get to know the surfing process. What's it like? How does it feel to surf on a board that weighs 10 times as much as a polyurethane board? That doesn't have a fin, so you can't steer the same way. And he was describing it, but he said, we're both surfers. Just take the board and go. So I did, and I took his surfboard, which these things, they sell for thousands of dollars, and they hang in museums. There's one at the Waikiki Surfrider in downtown Honolulu, hung up as a decoration. I took this board, which is priceless, and went out surfing, and it was incredible. I had never ridden a board like this in my life. Any of you that have ever surfed, the board rides high in the water. It's foam. It floats up so high. This board was just below the surface, and it flexed with the waves. I felt like I was connected to the ocean in a way that I had never been before on a surfboard. And that's how the native Hawaiians originally surfed. I got a little taste of that for myself. Another person that comes to mind is a woman I met in Ghana. Ghana is one of the places where breadfruit has been planted as a way of making food more secure, the food system more secure. And I met a woman named Victoria Abankwa. She works for the local extension office there in Elmina, Ghana. And her job involves, like a lot of people that work for an extension office, she has many different things that she does. But what she does best is promotes breadfruit. She shows up at farmers markets with breadfruit for sale. And in many cases, this is the first time the would-be customers have seen breadfruit. It's a new crop for many people in Ghana. So Victoria starts cutting it up, dropping it into the deep fryer, producing food for them to sample. If you've ever shopped at Costco, you know the power of a free sample. This is what she does. And she sings the praises of breadfruit and sells it to people who have never tried it before because she has convinced them that it's something good. I even watched her do this with the mayor of her district. She prepared it for him, served it to him in his office. It was his first time ever to try it, and he was sold from then on. So she's a person that I remember. There's so many more. This book experience has really been about meeting people whose lives intersect with breadfruit, or maybe whose lives are even dedicated to breadfruit, and learning their stories. And that's been the most rewarding part of all of this.
So if you're going to advise Mary and I and others as to how to get people aware of breadfruit and its nutritional power, its value, the fact that it's exotic, it's no longer this dark history, but rather it has this huge potential. How do we go about that? How do we communicate what's important about breadfruit? I mean, your book, I think, is a part of that, but what else can we do?
Well, it's a challenge for me to advise you and Mary. I come to you for advice, but to answer to how do we get people aware of and excited about breadfruit, I think there are two main ways. I think the first is what Victoria does in Ghana, and that is get it on people's plates. Find a way for people to get a chance to taste it. If you've never had a food with breadfruit as an ingredient, tonight's your chance. You've got crackers and cookies and some other things over here for you to sample. But the other, I think, has to do with the story. People like a good story. How many times have you bought a product that was maybe inferior to or more expensive than the alternative because the one you chose had a better story, right? That's often how we make our decisions, our economic decisions. And I think sharing the just immense backstory and various backstories that breadfruit has, where any place breadfruit grows, it has a backstory in that place. It's not one story. Every Caribbean island has a slightly different variation of breadfruit story. Every Pacific island has a slightly different origin story, a mythical origin story that involves the gods and involves famine and all these different elements, but they're slightly different on every island. And I think embracing and harnessing the power of those stories is a way to get breadfruit into people's consciousness and to make people excited about it.
One of the things in the book, and Mary pointed this out to me early on, backstory a little bit. A lot of people have a breadfruit tree in their backyard. And so that was one of the reasons people have taken breadfruit for granted. And they said our work was not necessary. We also find that there's individual farmers that have a number of breadfruit trees and they sell them. In fact, we've given a bunch of breadfruit trees to farmers, visited the farmers years later, and they say, these breadfruit trees that you gave us, that's my pension. And so it's a source of income. The third level, so we have individual and then groups or co-op groups, and then there's commercial interest. So we would like to see commercial interest in breadfruit. That's how you're going to get an adequate supply to build the marketplace, to build the awareness. But Mary said, did you ever notice that breadfruit trees grow best in people's backyards? And so the yield is better. What's the magic there? I think you observed the same thing. What do you think is going on?
I've seen it in more than one place. You're right. I mean, it's consistent that breadfruit does better in proximity to people. And part of that might be related to the history. Breadfruit, early on in its domestication and its propagation across the Pacific, that first journey that I talk about in the book, it's apparent from the comparison of different varieties of breadfruit on different Pacific islands, and I'm leaning on Nairi's work on this as well, that people were making choices in which specific trees they propagated. It wasn't just take whatever you can get and go plant it on the next island. People were selecting for certain characteristics, just like you would do if you were, propagating roses, or like the Dutch were doing with tulips so many years ago. They're looking for certain characteristics and propagating those intentionally. And one of those characteristics is seedlessness. People in the Pacific, history and botany show us they obviously preferred breadfruits without seeds than breadfruits with. So think of grapes. When you go to the supermarket to buy grapes, you're mostly going to buy the ones that are seedless. They're easier to eat. My children chew one that has seeds and think, "What is this?" It was the same with breadfruit. But when a plant loses its seeds, it loses its ability to propagate itself in that way, right? So breadfruit can propagate by sending up shoots from its roots, but it doesn't have that ability to produce seeds that are then dispersed by animals or spread further away like that. So what breadfruit was doing as it was becoming domesticated was it was becoming reliant upon people. It was forming a symbiotic relationship with people. The breadfruit fed the people propagated the breadfruit. And that's what you see across the Pacific Ocean. It's what you see in other parts of the world where breadfruit grows too. It was pointed out to me in Ghana when I was out with these agricultural extension officers, and we talked, these are very level-headed people, maybe the breadfruit near the house, it's finding some water from a leaky pipe or something. But I talked with a woman in Tahiti about this who took a much more philosophical approach and said, no, the breadfruit needs to know that you're still there. That's why it grows better close to your house, because it knows that you're close by. So it's a plant that is in symbiosis with people. It's not a plant that does as well without human presence.
We're getting to where we're going to invite the audience to ask a few questions, and we have some scholarly members in the audience as well. Why don't we open it up? John, you want to ask the first question?
With pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to touch on two things based on the conversation we just had. First of all, the darker side of it, as you put it, the irony behind the whole thing is the fact that they were feeding the slave something that has nutritional value, exceptional nutritional value. You're talking about lowering blood pressure. You're talking about it's gluten free to begin with. You're talking about regulating the sugar level in your body. This food, well, we call it food, is a magical food. It has all the nutritional value you can take of. I'm being a bit passionate about it.
Yeah, that's good.
My background is chemical engineering, and I studied food science as well. So I studied it very, very well, to the point that I become a fanatic of it. Okay, I mean, I cannot help it. So they were feeding the slave something that could keep them alive, and God knows they stay alive, and they were able to go day after day and work hard and still be alive. So that's the side of it I wanted to point out.
Yes.
It was a blessing in disguise.
It was a blessing in disguise, and people at the time, they didn't know it. As a matter of fact, they call it slave food, food for the slave. They probably didn't quite consume it, the masters and all the rest. Another thing regarding how we're going to communicate that to the rest of the population, I'm from Haiti. There is that stigma, kind of prejudice against that particular breadfruit. People who don't know the value of it. I do know the value of it. I would eat breadfruit in so many ways. Fry, express, you name it. It's a very, very wonderful kind of food. The second part, how we're going to propagate it, how we're going to educate people. The breadfruit doesn't age well, in the sense that after 48 hours, it becomes saggy. I'm working on some research around how to prolong the life, the shelf life of
One of the ways we do that is to encourage processing. So when there's a large amount of breadfruit that would otherwise waste, we say you dehydrate that, you dry it, or you could freeze it, depends on what resources you have available, and then you can have some breadfruit year round.
I can't find any restaurants serving breadfruit in Chicago. Are there any that you know of?
There are some Jamaican restaurants. As John pointed out, breadfruit has a short shelf life. So it's very hard to get a good quality fresh breadfruit. Down in Rogers Street, there's a marketplace there. Mary goes down, and if they come in on Saturday, you better get there by Saturday at 10 a.m. because they're in demand. But there's value-added products. So there's tostones and pancake mix. There's a lot that's available online.
At
We're
this
working.
Jamaican market in Rogers Park?
Yes,
Okay.
and also online. So yes, and
Yeah,
we
I got
encourage-
chips from Amazon. Oh, sorry. The place that should not be named. That's the only thing I was able to do.
Any comments, Russell, on the types of products? I mean, we debate this all the time. What would be appealing?
Mhm.
One of my theories is that you give people something that's interesting, but not too different
Yeah.
from what they're already accustomed to.
Well,
What about fermentation?
so there's a couple of ways to ferment breadfruit. There's the traditional way from French Polynesia, where you bury it underground and it turns into kind of a paste that lasts years. And I ate it. I met a man who's an expert in making this, and I thought it was very good. I don't know if it would sell in Chicago, but I certainly would eat it again. But another way of fermentation that maybe we're more familiar with is the production of alcoholic beverages. And there are people making wines, there are people making breadfruit beers, and the one that maybe is the most famous in the United States is Mutiny Island vodka, which is distilled from breadfruit. It's the only starch used. And the Trees That Feed has a loose affiliation with Mutiny Island vodka, and I went down to the Virgin Islands where it's made, and I met the people making it. So there are ways to create something shelf stable. I agree with you, though, that making something familiar is an easy bridge into something new. And I have kind of a love-hate relationship with the comparison, but breadfruit is often compared to potatoes. Fresh breadfruit, when you've just harvested it and you're ready to cook with it in the kitchen, it's often compared to potatoes. And I have some reasons to be against that comparison. I think it is different. It's its own. It's not a tree potato. It's its own fruit. It's not a lesser form of potato. But it can be used like potatoes in a lot of recipes. So if you go to the website of the Hawaiian Ulu Cooperative, Ulu just means breadfruit in Hawaiian, they have hundreds of recipes for free on their website. And most of them involve replacing potatoes with breadfruit. It's something you're familiar with.
Other question over here?
A basic question. Where did breadfruit get its name?
I have a basic answer. There was a pirate named William Dampier from England. He was sailing across the Pacific trying to hunt down and take a Spanish galleon, and they stopped in Guam for supplies, and he was handed this fruit, this thing. He didn't know it was a fruit, but this large object, and told to eat it. And he watched the native people in Guam prepare it, and then when they served it to him roasted, he said, "This is just like the bread that we have in England." So it didn't have a name yet in English, so Dampier took it upon himself to call it breadfruit. And today, even in languages other than English, it's called breadfruit. In most European languages, at least, have simply translated breadfruit into their own language. So fruit à pain in French.
In Haiti, they call it veritable.
Vegetable.
Veritable.
Okay.
La veritable. And we know enough Creole to say why that happened. And so when the British brought breadfruit to the English-speaking colonies, the Spanish thought that was a good idea, the French thought it was a good idea, and they brought breadfruit to Haiti, and the only problem was that breadfruit had seeds. Some people in Haiti actually still eat the seeds, they're nutritious, but the local people rejected it, it wasn't as acceptable. The French came back later on, years later, with breadfruit with no seeds, and lamberita means the true, the correct tree.
Yeah.
So we're studying our Haitian Creole.
I like that. That's like a ding on the French. It's like you got it right this time.
Exactly. Other questions? There's a question over here. Peter?
Is it grown anywhere in the United States?
It is. If you take a broad view of the United States, if you include all of our territories, it's grown in all 5 inhabited territories. I visited all of them for this book. It's grown in Hawaii. It thrives there. It grows in the southernmost tip of Florida. And I grew up in South Florida. I was born in Tampa. As a child, I never saw breadfruit. Today, you can go to Tampa and you can see breadfruit growing. Now, it takes protection in the wintertime. The burlap or electric heaters or something, it doesn't make it through a winter if it's a cold winter on its own, but it's getting there and it's changing. And you can watch climate change in action by mapping the northernmost breadfruit in Florida because it changes year by year. When I started this research, the northernmost breadfruit I could find was near Miami in South Florida. Now it's in the town of my birth, Tampa, and a line that goes across. There's one in Orlando, there's one in Cocoa Beach, and they're all growing outdoors, exposed to the elements, and they just require a little bit of help in the winter. So I live in South Carolina. People I work with have asked me how long until it can grow here. I say, I hope not soon, because that's a bad sign.
If I may add, it has to be around the equator, 17 degrees north, 17 degrees south. That band, you make the best bread.
I was born at 28 degrees north, and breadfruit grows where I was born now. So times they are a-changing.
It's absolutely spread. There's a couple of papers that we try to keep track of, academic papers. That's a fundamental part of the support that Trees That Feed gets and needs, so that we have the knowledge that we don't want to disseminate false facts. We want to, rely on research. Other questions? There was one over here.
Yeah, I've got a question. The average person in Senegal or Ghana or someplace like that who doesn't have a backyard to grow one of these things has to buy it in the store or wherever. And I'm sure there's a variety, but is it affordable? Where does it come in price wise? Is it down in the lower level, or is it considered?
I can only speak to Ghana. You can probably talk about other countries, but in Ghana it's very affordable. It was going for, I think, the equivalent of 10 or 15 cents American for a single breadfruit. Contrast that, there's a website, a UK-based website, that if you live in the UK, they'll deliver one to your house for 80 pounds. A single breadfruit for 80 pounds sterling. There's some arbitrage that could be done there. Pick it in Ghana, take it to the UK.
And in Jamaica, a couple of thoughts. There was a very bad hurricane, Melissa, which you've all heard of. And we got a very good response. In fact, a number of donations that are allocated to helping people in Jamaica. There's a new program that's just been announced by the ministry. They're going to replant. It's called the Leaf Program, which is a pun on the word leaf. And they're planting hundreds of thousands of trees, including some that we have provided. But it's a very valuable crop for that kind of replacement. It grows in wider and wider areas. You were going to mention Florida, and so we see that in Jamaica. After Melissa, now you can buy a breadfruit in Jamaica, and it used to be 50 cents, and now it's $5. And so, because of the scarcity, the good news is that they're aggressively replanting to become to replace what has been lost. The good news also is that there are different varieties of breadfruit, of which Russell, you might want to speak about, but there's one that Trees That Feed has brought in to Jamaica and elsewhere. That's called Ma'afala. That's the Hawaiian name, I guess. And it's quick growing, and it's relatively cold resistant, so it can grow further north than some other plants. And so we're looking for more research into the different varieties, how they behave. We'd like to see year-round growing seasons rather than just bunched in a few short months.
Yeah, if you're familiar with other fruits like apples, they come in different varieties. You've got the Honeycrisp and the Granny Smith. Breadfruit's just the same. It has its own cultivars, its own varieties. And one way that the cultivars differ is in how fast they produce and when during the year they produce.
So I don't really know much about this, but so how do you, when you say you take it to different places and you plant them, what do you plant? Is it just the fruit itself? And then how long does it take for the tree to bear fruit? Or does that happen right away? And how do they harvest it? And when they harvest it, is there a purpose in mind for? I mean, if you're picking it off a tree, that's one thing. But they're not all ready at the same time, or they are, or do you need a whole group of people if you have a whole bunch of them? Or how does that all work?
The whole how-to.
She's gonna start a farm.
Yeah.
when we're done with it. One of the challenges, and Russell will correct me if I say anything wrong. There's no seeds to plant. So you have to propagate either using roots or stems. You could graft, or best of all, there's tissue culture, the same way that orchids and petunias and everything else is propagated. So when we first got started, we placed an order with a tissue culture organization in Florida, I guess it was at the time, and we ordered 1,000 plants. And they propagate in a lab under sterile conditions. So finally they called us back. And I'm prompting Mary, she's on the phone. and make sure that they have all 1,000 plants, because that's a big order. And she said, well, how many do you have? And they said, we've got all 20,000 for you. And so they can produce very large quantities. We found that we can get large quantities with other methods of propagation, but that's a very good way. But then you buy a tree that's that big. So now you have to nurture that, harden it, get it in a pot, then plant it and distribute. When it's larger, when it's maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, it's ready to go out in the field. This is the short version of the story. And then in about 3 years, you start to get fruit. So I don't know if you want to add.
Well, and she asked about harvesting too. Yeah, I mean they're usually seasonal, so it's true that not every fruit is at the same level of ripeness exactly at the same moment, but within the same few weeks, that's when that tree is bearing. Most of the traditional cultures have some kind of a pole-like tool for picking. They grow high above. People usually prune their trees so that they don't have to climb quite as high to get them. But you've got a pole for picking, a basket for catching, or an assistant for catching if you trust them. I've been asked to do that many times in many different countries and have always disappointed. I played soccer as a kid, not football. I don't catch with my hands, I kick with my feet. And you don't kick breadfruits with your feet. And you harvest them for the purpose of using, right away. Like has been said several times, the shelf life is not really breadfruit strength. So you wouldn't want to harvest a lot at once unless you had a use in mind for those, whether that's, eating them all, or selling, or giving, or producing something more shelf-stable, like flour, or vodka, or whatever you have in mind.
You're a Hawaiian surfer. How big is the tree trunks that he could get? Wood to make
Breadfruit is a very stout tree.
they're big.
The trunk is very big. I would not be able to hug a mature breadfruit tree and touch my hands. Yeah, they're very large, and even some of the lateral limbs can be almost as thick in diameter as the trunk. It's a very stout tree. They keep them pruned, like I said, so that people aren't having to climb up so high. But yeah, in terms of lumber, it produces a lot of lumber. It's not a hardwood. Now, you wouldn't want to build a large boat or a house out of it, but for smaller needs or for specialty needs like surfboards, it's the right kind of wood.
One more question, and then make sure we have time for signing.
Absolutely.
All right, who
For
gets to
sure.
be the last question of the night?
Would you touch on yield for
Yield? It varies by variety. Hundreds of fruits, certainly, per tree when it's a big, mature tree. Within a season, not all at one time. But that really changes by variety.
Just before we wrap up with the signing, Trees at Feed did a study, so working with the College of Agriculture in Jamaica, and we had students working, again, our reliance on academic support, but we do sort of the practical side of things. So we got student teams, we sent them out, we identified 50 trees all across Jamaica. They went out every 2 weeks for 2 years. So we have a lot of data points. We know how many fruit were on the tree, every observation, which quadrant of the tree even. And so we have that on our website. So if anybody's interested, let us know and we can share that with you. But it's pretty interesting. That's a perfect example. When we got started, all the information we got was anecdotal. And it was in conflict all over the place. But so we do have gradually more and better information.
All right, thank you so much, and thank everybody for coming.